still in the primary years here. So now talking about language and literacy in the primary years for kids in grades 1 through 3, which is considered those primary years. So we look at the phonological development. We're going to look at the different stages of language development and language literacy here in this age group. So first is phonological development. So here talking about articulation errors, how they pronounce their words. Typically disappear by the age of 8 as they understand the words a little better, use them correctly, their speech patterns form a little bit better as well. Second language learners are very good at showing proficiency in both languages. They're starting to use them successfully as well. Successive dual language learners, though sometimes will substitute similar sounds. They're going to mix a few things up. So even though they're showing proficiency, they're still going to have some things that are going to be difficult for them to do. So we should not identify them as deficient. So if you know a student, number one, who is trying to learn 2 languages or comes to school only knowing 1 language, for example, and then is trying to learn English or whatever the dominant language is in the classroom, there's going to be some changes and stuff in there. So we want to be careful not to list them as deficient. There are some atypical phonological development things that we want to look at. Okay? So some kids or primary age children show articulation errors in the pronunciation of things and quite how they're saying them. Disfluency. Okay? So fluency is how well, right? We read a series of words, sentences, those types of things. So disfluency is where there is not that even reading of the words, where it just kind of rolls off the tongue. They know the words, they're able to say them, but they're much slower and choppier in regards to that. And then poor voice quality. If you hear some kids talking really softly, that would be an example of poor voice quality. Okay? And if you have some of these components here that show up, typically a speech language pathologist would be referred to them to hopefully help take care and do some practice on some of those issues that they're having. Semantic development begins here with, or not begins, but it continues to develop in this age group where they start to refine the word meanings, really understanding what those words mean. And so besides just saying them, they know what they are and able to use that vocabulary very well. Dual language learners separate their words into 2 mental dictionaries. You know, what the word, whatever their primary language, their secondary language. So splitting that up, one, how they say it maybe in the secondary language, what it means, how they say that word in their primary language, and what it means as well. Children with semantic delays may have some other cognitive difficulties that they might be experiencing. Trouble identifying synonyms or opposites or antonyms, and also learning some of the morpheme components of the semantic development as well. Syntax. Sentences are long and complex as they get into this age group. They start to become more long and complex. And kids will have some difficulty with passive verb forms as well. Dual language learners acquire the syntax of the second language in steps. It's very like detail oriented or step oriented. It's not just natural, as in the way that we would potentially learn that as a regular language, as our first language, not a regular language, our first language. Correcting an early step, so making helping students correct things is not necessarily effective for dual language learners. Sometimes we want to help them along, but it's okay for them to make mistakes in this process. So some atypical syntactic development typically, again, may follow some cognitive disabilities or learning disabilities, or there's something called the general language delay, where students just are a little bit behind in acquiring language. And it's not that they have a learning disability or cognitive disability, but it's maybe that just are not exposed to enough language as they enter kindergarten or first grade, for example. So they have some time that they need to catch up, and that's that general language delay, and they will catch up over a little bit of time. Metalinguistic awareness. Children at this age, the primary age, can identify sentences as whether they are grammatically correct or they are incorrect. They're able to provide definitions for words, and they can connect or relate words to other words, right? Similar to probably synonyms, right? Or connect, types of words together, a definition of word for this, or is similar to the other one, etc. Use languages to make jokes, segment phrases or sentences, and so they might have part of it correct, but they're kind of breaking it up incorrectly, or using the phrases or sentences a little bit incorrectly. Pragmatics then learn and practice social rules of communication based on cultural norms within their school setting, within their community setting. And so knowing that in some American schools here, it talks about use of formal language or standard English, turn taking, consciousness when informing and explaining, conciseness, asking clear questions to request information, stick to the main topic. So in some schools, not all American schools, these are some things that you look at. Now, it just depends on your school, your community, your families, et cetera, et cetera. So the pragmatics, okay, learn and practice the social rules of communication. What does that look like, okay, in your classroom? What does that look like within the communities where your children are from or live? Right? So those are things you want to look at, okay? Example here, use of formal language or standard English. There might be things that kids can say outside of school, at home, that they can't say in school or in the classroom. Okay? So those are something those are things that need to be addressed with kids. Okay? It may not be like a bad word or a swear word or something, but it might be something that that's appropriate or acceptable outside of school, but not in school. So the social rules, helping kids understand social rules for communication can be different in different situations. Bilingual education, of course, we have immersion, as we have right here up at the college here in Fort Yates. Now immersion can be, this here is Lakota immersion, but you can have English immersion for students who are speak different language at home and come to an English speaking school. We have Spanish. I mean, there's all kinds of immersion type of schools. You have maintenance or developmental model where kids, typically this is more along the lines of kids who do not speak a certain language and then are coming to speak a different language than what is spoken at school, and they're working on developing that language, that new language, as quickly as possible. Two-way bilingual would be a school where multiple languages are spoken, multiple languages are being developed and taught. The additive approach is the most effective, along with social support. So additive would be kind of a sprinkling in and adding in of a new language to be taught in a classroom instead. It's got to be social support, meaning I can't just teach a new language to a group of children or one children and then expect them to get that on their own. Social support, social settings are important to be able to use language that you are learning to speak. We didn't learn how to speak English just from a classroom or just from a teacher, right? We learned from our family members, friends, and we practice that language in a social setting, not just in the classroom. Okay, production or the stages in bilingual education. Pre-production, focusing on the understanding of that second language. Your transition to production, then the readiness to produce like sounds and verbalizations and words and sentences. Early production, expansion of production, introduction to written forms. So as you're going through here, you're producing these sounds and verbalizations, you're understanding some words, you're connecting those words, you're making sentences, you're visiting with people, and then you're introduced to the written form. If you think about how we develop English, we don't typically start writing until we are kindergarten, first grade age. So it takes us a little while to do that now as adults, for example, and even older children, that might go a little bit quicker. Literacy development. So the writing component is a very important part of learning literacy. So again, this can develop in stages as well, from pre-phonemic, phonemic, transitional, and conventional writing. Okay, so transitional, complete words, invented spelling. Not all the spelling has to be correct or accurate, as kids are working through understanding and learning how to do that. And then taking breaks between words as well. So a different and important part of that learning to write. Now, some of this writing now can, for younger kids, definitely still takes place with paper and pencil, but some, as kids are transitioning into that second and third grade of the primary years, could start to be using keyboarding for their writing components. So that's something to remember as well. It's not always just writing, it can be keyboarding. Promoting writing in the classroom is important, right? Encourage kids to write independently. And using the invented spelling, they don't have to have it spelled correctly. They don't have to come up to you every single time they don't know how to spell a word and ask you how to spell it, for example. Just have them come right as close as they can, or what they think it sounds like, and then we can come back later and help them correct that. Have a writing center in your classroom. Opportunities for journaling, whether they're writing on paper or typing on a laptop or on a computer. A writing workshop where there's an opportunity to kids to learn different ways and styles and how to write. And then integrating writing across the curriculum. Don't just do it as a standalone. Can you incorporate it into other subjects as you're working on information throughout the day. Reading is an important part of literacy development. Okay? As you probably know, maybe not, but as you're going through developing reading with kids, it develops in stages. Early on in the reading, as kids learn to read, it's very picture governed. Okay, you think about kindergarten, for example, right? And you do a lot of reading with picture books. You're showing them the books, you're reading the information, you're talking about it, etc. So you go from story not formed, story formed, to written language like. You move into that printed type of book, right? For kindergarten, first grade, second, etc. And you start looking at these different components here until you eventually get to that independent reading, where children are choosing the books they want to read and taking time, and you're providing time to for them to read it in classes as well as outside of class. Okay? Read to kids daily, and important to include increasingly challenging books. So this might, as kids are younger, it might be some circle time. As they get a little bit older, it might be some time where they follow along in a book as you read to them. That might be a little bit more challenging of a book for some kids. So that you want it, the opportunity for them to see and follow along how words are pronounced, what they sound like, what they look like. Independent reading is important. Encourage that. Allow time for that. Guided reading, as I talked about a little bit about here, when you're reading or someone else is reading, and they are following along. Model strategies for sounding out words, understanding words, reading words, introducing new words and building sight vocabulary. So words that they're going to instantly recognize. Word walls, sight word walls, all those things are important to share with the kids as they continue to grow and develop their vocabulary. And then facilitate grand conversations. You want to have large conversations about parts of books, vocabulary terms, situations, etc. It's important to have those big conversations and get kids thinking about a variety of things in regards to reading and literacy. Children of different cultures show distinct aptitudes for and dispositions towards literacy. There's different materials in the homes, different types of books. Families interact differently with the material in regards to reading, language arts, and literacy. And so some are storytelling with very little printed material. Some are very heavily on the printed material and less on the conversation or storytelling. Okay, so there can be a variety of joking, music, etc. So some things can be in place regards to literacy that take the place more of reading than reading a printed book, for example. So storytelling, joking, music, etc., all that is part of literacy. It's language that is being shared with kids. So as long as there is engagement, that's important. But you want to try to take time to understand, the different things that happen at home. If you just ask kids, how many of your parents read to you? And some kids don't raise their hand. That may not necessarily mean that they're not being engaged in language development or literacy development. Ask them about things like storytelling, the music, etc. For dual language learners, a little bit on the literacy component of that. Acquisition of verbal skills and early print awareness with native language happens early on. Okay? You want to have some instruction for reading and writing in the second language because you want to help parents understand that and develop that with their kids as well. It goes back to that social situation, social setting that you need to have that for kids to help develop that second language. Development of awareness of distinction between rules and practices in each language. So the social context, the rules and languages of how to pronounce words, say words, when to use them, etc., is going to be different, of course, for each language. So kids with special needs are going to have some unique difficulties or requirements in learning to read, learning the literacy, and those different components, right? As we identify them and see them, we want to make sure we refer them to the special ed director, special ed teacher within the school setting to see if there is some kind of issue or not. Also, we'll reach out and have conversations with the parents to share your concerns with them and get them on board with their help and their support. Some specific learning disabilities in reading can look like, they're not limited to these, but can look like some of these. Communicate well orally, but read and write far below grade level. Perform well on academic tasks that do not require reading. Confuse similar looking letters and words, and guesses without applying reading strategies. Okay, so these are some things that you might come across or you might see with kids, and there's specifically some learning disabilities in reading. Here it talks about some regions of the brain and where they're connected to reading and the language component of that. So the temporal gyrus, superior, medial, fused form gyrus, and inferior frontal gyrus. I don't know if it's really necessarily that you remember all those components, but there it is. So